The candles flicker against velvet-draped walls. The air is thick, not with incense, but with something heavier, sweeter, almost suffocating. A silence hangs over the chamber, the kind that makes even seasoned guards tremble at their post. You step closer, and then it hits you. A stench so sharp it burns the throat, so foul it forces your eyes to water. It is not the odor of death as you've known it, not the slow, dry rot of time, but a violent collapse of flesh, a body unraveling in hours what should have taken months. Before you lies a coffin, hastily reinforced with silks and wood, yet leaking a sour perfume into the night air. Inside, the once mighty Queen of England, Elizabeth Tudor, is dissolving before her attendants' eyes. Skin swells and darkens, lips have turned to ash, and her royal fingers curl in grotesque shapes, as if still clinging to a crown she cannot hold. This was the Virgin Queen, the woman who defied empires, outwitted assassins, and ruled a golden age. Yet in death, her body betrayed her secrets. Secrets of poison painted onto her skin, perfumes soaked into her flesh, wigs crawling with vermin, and rituals of beauty that hollowed her from within. Tonight, we pull away the powdered mask and uncover the dark truth Elizabeth I tried to hide. Before we begin, tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these cursed stories travel. And if you're brave enough to stay with us through the rot, subscribe now to Cursed Chronicles, where history's darkest truths are brought back to life. They called her the Virgin Queen, the untouchable ruler of an empire that stretched across oceans, a sovereign who seemed almost divine in her majesty. Painters immortalized her as radiant, flawless, ageless. Shakespeare himself bent words into verse that crowned her with the aura of a goddess. To the public, Elizabeth Tudor was not simply a woman. She was England itself, radiant with youth, draped in silks and armored in glory. But within the palace walls, away from the gilded portraits and the gaze of poets, another truth festered. The real Elizabeth was not untouched by time. She was marked, scarred, wounded. As a young woman, smallpox had ravaged her face, leaving pits and scars where smooth skin once lay. In an age when power depended on beauty, when a queen's body was a symbol of her nation's strength, she could not afford to let those scars define her. So she covered them. Layer by layer, she built an image that could not age, could not bleed, could not fail. Yet behind the illusion was a body that groaned under the weight of its disguise. Pain gnawed at her jaws, ulcers spread beneath her painted mask, and the very remedies meant to preserve her only poisoned her further. Elizabeth's body became a battlefield, between flesh and facade, between truth and the myth she had crafted. Every portrait was a lie that had to be maintained at any cost. Each brushstroke of white let across her face was more than vanity, it was survival. For a single crack in her appearance, a single glimpse of weakness, could invite whispers of rebellion, treachery, or even deposition. She ruled not only with armies, not only with laws, but with the fragile illusion of immortality. This is the paradox at the heart of her reign. A queen celebrated for her brilliance, yet enslaved by the very mask that gave her power. And the more she fought to preserve the image, the faster her body withered beneath it. If you're shocked that Elizabeth's power depended on illusion more than strength, tap the like button. It helps more people uncover this truth. And tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these cursed stories travel. Imagine yourself walking through the long galleries of Whitehall Palace. The torches sputter in iron sconces, the air thick with incense and the murmur of courtiers awaiting their queen. The doors open. A hush falls. Elizabeth steps forward, tall, stately, wrapped in silks that shimmer like moonlight. Her face glows pale, untouched by time, her lips painted crimson, her eyes piercing through the hall. To those who watch, she seems eternal, majestic, flawless, almost unearthly. But as you draw closer, the illusion begins to tremble. Her smile falters, and a sour breath drifts across the air, heavy and rotten. Beneath the gleaming pearls, beneath the powdered perfection, lies the reality of a body in torment. Her courtiers bow deeply, yet many hold their breath, dreading what it means to stand too close. Elizabeth's mouth was her first battlefield. She had adored sugar since her youth, white crystals imported at great cost from her colonies. To consume it daily was a symbol of wealth, a display of England's reach across the seas. But sugar was silent poison. Her teeth blackened and cracked, gums oozed with infection, and one by one, her teeth fell away, leaving behind jagged stumps in a bleeding graveyard of flesh. Ambassadors who came to praise her wrote instead of their horror, how her mouth stank like death, how her words were slurred by decay, how even the Queen of England could not command her own body. Physicians offered remedies, but Elizabeth, proud and unyielding, refused them. To admit illness, to confess weakness, was to hand her enemies a weapon. One court physician dared to offer her comfort, suggesting extraction of a rotting tooth. She banished him in fury. Another, desperate to win her trust, pulled out one of his own teeth before her eyes, screaming in agony to prove his skill. Elizabeth, her jaw clenched in pain, dismissed him with a smile that reeked of infection. Better to endure rot than reveal vulnerability. As the years passed, her suffering only deepened. Bread had to be soaked before she could eat it. Meat boiled until it dissolved into paste. Courtiers whispered of her anguish at banquets, turning her head away from the crowd, hiding her chewing behind jeweled fans. Shakespeare himself was said to adjust lines in his plays to avoid words she could no longer pronounce. The greatest orator of her age was undone by her own mouth. But Elizabeth would not let the truth escape. She chewed cloves to sweeten her breath, tucked rose petals between her teeth, and commissioned silver-plated utensils to gleam against her lips. Still, no disguise could bury the stench. Dignitaries coughed as she spoke. Some left her presence faint and shaken, writing letters home that the Queen of England's mouth was no more than a small cemetery. And through it all, she clung to her image. Portraits painted her with perfect teeth, rosy lips, and a smile as radiant as the dawn. Artists knew what was at stake. To paint her truth was treason, so they painted the mask. And thus her mouth became a grave she carried within her, a silent rot hidden behind royal silence. But the teeth were only the beginning, for if her smile revealed decay, her very flesh became a prison of stench and sweat. Elizabeth's fear of water, and her strange rituals of false purity, would soon transform her entire body into a kingdom of rot. If you followed her story this far, consider subscribing to Cursed Chronicles. Here we uncover the truths history tried to bury, stories of power, illusion, and decay. And before we go deeper into Elizabeth's perfumed prison, tap like and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing our cursed tales travel across the world. To Elizabeth, water was not cleansing. It was deadly. From her youth she had been warned by physicians and priests alike that bathing might weaken her essence, that water could seep through the skin and drown a soul from within. And so the most powerful woman in Europe grew to fear the very act of washing. What she refused to scrub away, she buried instead beneath perfumes and layers of cloth, until her body became a vessel of contradiction, glorious on the surface, festering beneath. Her attendants dabbed her skin with cloths steeped in rose water, vinegar, or wine, not to cleanse her, but to smother the odors rising from her flesh. She wore layers upon layers, corsets, bodices, gowns, skirts, each one absorbing sweat, each one trapping heat. Beneath the silks, her flesh sweltered and cracked. Yet she believed the heavy scent of her body was sacred, a divine perfume no water could match. On rare occasions she would allow herself a bath, but even this ritual was a pageant of illusion. Attendants scattered petals across the water, poured in oils and herbs, and blessed the mixture with whispered prayers. Elizabeth would lower herself into the perfumed liquid, but she did not wash. She sat. Hours passed. The water thickened, turning into a soup of wilted petals, oils, and sweat. It was never replaced, only perfumed again. By the end, the bath was a tomb of fragrance and decay, and she would rise from it no cleaner than she had entered. The sheets that wrapped her body reeked of sickness, but she refused to change them often. Servants begged, pleaded, but she declared that her natural scent carried meaning, that her odor itself was necessary for her dreams. Her chambers, once designed for grandeur, became suffocating prisons. The air thick with incense, lavender sachets, and sweat, a perfume so heavy that foreign dignitaries staggered when they entered. One French envoy wrote that her presence was like breathing roses left too long on a grave, sweet and foul at once. Her refusal to wash left her skin brittle and wounded. Beneath the corsets, sores bloomed. Beneath the perfumes, rashes spread across her thighs and stomach. Attendants saw flakes of dried perfume peeling from her arms like scales. Physicians, desperate to relieve her, tried to clean her with ointments behind her ears, only to be met with screams of sorcery and accusations of treason. To touch the queen's body was to risk banishment, or worse. And so the truth grew stronger. Elizabeth's flesh was no longer her own. It had become a battlefield where paranoia and ritual replaced reason, where scent became armor, and where decay found fertile ground beneath silks and jewels. To the world, she was radiant. To those who served her, she was a body of incense and rot, an empress of perfume and corruption. But still, this was not enough. For when perfume could no longer hide her collapse, Elizabeth turned to paint, to powder, and to poisons that would harden her mask until the mask itself began to consume her. When the weight of perfumes could no longer conceal what lay beneath, Elizabeth reached for something more enduring: paint. To her, cosmetics were not decoration. They were armor, a weapon to guard against time, and the very foundation of her throne. Her chosen weapon was Venetian ceruse, a thick white paste of lead and vinegar that promised to erase every blemish, every scar, every hint of age. Spread across her face in layers, it gave her the pale, flawless complexion celebrated in portraits, the skin of a goddess untouched by human frailty. Courtiers praised her radiance, poets wrote of her divine glow, and artists immortalized her with a porcelain sheen that seemed eternal. But beneath the surface, the poison was working its slow revenge. The lead seeped through her pores, into her blood, her bones, her very mind. Her skin cracked beneath the paint, ulcers opened on her cheeks, and each morning her attendants painted over the wounds again, sealing agony beneath the mask. By her 40s, smiling tore her skin. Laughing left trails of blood. What the world saw as serene divinity was in truth a mask hardened by pain. The toxins twisted more than her flesh. They frayed her nerves, poisoned her sleep, and cast shadows across her mind. Tremors shook her hands, paranoia crept into her thoughts, and still she would not put aside the brush and the pot. For Elizabeth, to strip away the paint was to strip away her crown. "My face is my throne," she declared, and so she chose illusion over truth, even as her body withered beneath the mask. Artists obeyed. They painted the mask, never the wounds. And so posterity inherited a queen who gleamed like marble, even as her skin rotted in silence. The portraits lied, but Elizabeth could not allow the truth to live. If you believe history should show us the truth, not just the portraits, tap like and share this story with someone who still imagines royal life was all glamour. And don't forget to subscribe to Cursed Chronicles, where we strip away the masks history tried to leave intact. Tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these dark truths travel. But the mask of paint was not her only disguise. By the time Elizabeth reached her late 30s, the long years of lead, mercury, and soot had taken another toll. Her once famous auburn hair began to fall in clumps. For a queen whose red gold locks had been celebrated as the fiery crown of England, baldness was more than vanity's curse, it was a threat to her power. Hair was youth. Hair was vitality. Hair was legitimacy. To lose it was to reveal decline. Her answer was wigs. Dozens of them. Some curled, some braided, some piled high in fantastical coils that defied gravity. Each one powdered to match her painted face, each one heavy with ornament. They became not only symbols of fashion, but sacred objects, extensions of the throne itself. They were handled with reverence, blessed before they touched her head, guarded at night as if they were relics of a saint. But beneath the wigs lay a truth too grotesque to speak aloud. They were not woven of her own hair, but of horsehair, goat hair, even strands taken from the heads of servants and the dead. They were held together with pastes of animal fat, starch, and glue, thick enough to rot under the heat of her crown. Where there was warmth and starch, there was life. Lice and fleas made their nests, and servants whispered of white larvae writhing near her scalp. Yet no one dared to speak the horror aloud, for to question the queen's crown was to risk ruin. The wigs themselves grew monstrous. Some weighed nearly 20 pounds, so heavy that carpenters had to raise doorways to let her pass, and iron collars were fitted to support the burden. Beneath them her scalp blistered, cracked, and bled. Pins dug into raw skin. Infection spread across her head until she wore an iron mesh beneath her wigs, a cage to protect what little flesh remained. Attendants fainted at the sight, but Elizabeth, unyielding, demanded her crown of horsehair, even when unconscious, even when fevered, even as wounds seeped beneath the weight. And still, the wigs were not optional. They were sacred armor, the final barrier between a rotting body and a watching world. Without them, she believed her reign would collapse, her enemies would circle, and the illusion of divinity would shatter. So the wigs remained, relics of majesty masking a battlefield of flesh and infection. By the end of her life, they were no longer ornaments but prisons. Her scalp so ravaged that even in death the morticians dared not remove them. She was embalmed with her crown of horsehair still fixed to her head, the final mask sealing her secrets in silence. But even death would not honor the disguise. For when Elizabeth's last breath escaped, her body betrayed her one final time. When death finally came for Elizabeth in the spring of 1603, it did not arrive gently. She had clung to ritual to the very last, refusing food, refusing rest, yet still demanding her wigs, her powders, her layers of silken disguise. But when her chest fell still, and the mask of divinity could no longer be reapplied, the illusion collapsed with a violence that shocked even those who had long tended her. Almost at once, her body began to unravel. Years of poison coursing through her veins erupted into sudden decay. Her skin darkened, her lips blackened, her neck swelled grotesquely. Fluids seeped from her nostrils and ears, her hands twisted into claw-like knots. The odor was overwhelming, so sharp, so foul, that guards gagged in her chambers, and attendants fainted where they stood. Roses and incense were piled around her bed, vinegar bowls set beneath the windows, but nothing could silence the stench. Her coffin was sealed, lined with crimson and lead, yet within hours the odor broke through. A second coffin was prepared, then a third. Still the rot poured outward. Rumors spread that the queen was cursed, that her body was eating itself, that even the tomb could not hold her. Tradition demanded her body be displayed before the people, but her attendants faced the impossible. The corpse of England's most glorious ruler was already collapsing into ruin, so they turned once more to illusion. Her face was covered with a wax mask, smooth and serene, hiding the ruptured flesh beneath. Gloves were placed on her hands, lace bound tightly around her neck. To the thousands who wept as the coffin passed through London, she seemed at peace, radiant still, the Virgin Queen in eternal rest. But those who walked beside the bier saw stains seeping through the silk. They smelled the truth, and they knew that beneath the mask lay not divinity, but devastation. Her body was lowered into Westminster Abbey beside her half-sister Mary, sealed within stone. Yet even then, whispers claimed the tomb itself exhaled a faint, sweet odor in the years that followed. A final perfume of rot, the last trace of a queen who had poisoned herself for the sake of a mask. If you followed Elizabeth's descent from majesty into decay, join us here in Cursed Chronicles. Tap subscribe to uncover more of the dark truths history tried to bury. Like this video if you believe power cannot silence the grave, and share in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing our cursed stories echo across the world. Elizabeth's death did not end her story. In many ways, it only deepened the paradox she had built throughout her life. For centuries, her reign would be remembered as England's golden age, a time of expansion, art, and triumph. The portraits endured: ivory skin, fiery hair, lips like rose petals, a woman untouched by age. To poets, she remained radiant, to chroniclers, eternal. Yet the truth, hidden in her chambers, whispered by attendants and foreign envoys, was far darker. Her life was a constant war between image and reality. From her earliest days as queen, Elizabeth understood that her very body was not her own. It was England's, a symbol to be displayed, defended, and perfected. She could not marry, for her virginity itself became political theater, a myth that bound her to her people as their untouchable bride. She could not age, for weakness was a predator that circled in the form of rival nobles, foreign kings, and ambitious courtiers. She could not be scarred, for scars reminded her enemies that she was mortal. And so she lived not as Elizabeth Tudor, but as Gloriana Astrea, the Virgin Queen, a creation forged of paint, perfume, and ritual. But myths demand sacrifice. Her flesh became collateral, her health the ransom for her throne. Every spoonful of sugar eaten for status rotted her mouth. Every application of Venetian ceruse masked a blemish, but burned deeper into her skin. Every wig affixed to her scalp preserved an image while carving wounds into her head. Even the perfumes meant to disguise her stench mingled with sweat and sores until her chambers became suffocating. She carried herself as eternal, but she was corroding in silence. And this silence was not only her own, it was enforced by fear. Her attendants, sworn to secrecy, could not speak of the horrors they witnessed. Physicians who dared to touch her wounds were dismissed in disgrace. Artists who painted her knew that the slightest hint of imperfection might cost them their lives. The entire court colluded in the lie, constructing a goddess out of powder and pearls, even as they gagged on the odor of her presence. Yet in that lie lay her genius. Elizabeth weaponized illusion as no ruler had before her. She understood the theater of monarchy, that to rule was to perform, to project an image so powerful it became reality. She transformed her scars into a mask of immortality, her frailty into a legend of divine strength. And in doing so, she held a fractured nation together for nearly half a century, outlasting rivals who dismissed her as weak, and presiding over one of the most celebrated eras in English history. But the cost of such performance was brutal. In the end, her body bore the marks of her reign more deeply than any battlefield. Her skin pitted and peeling, her mouth a chamber of rot, her scalp infested, her blood laced with poison. Death did not erase these sacrifices. It revealed them, tearing away the final veil and exposing what she had long hidden. The Virgin Queen, once radiant as the dawn, became in her last days a grotesque symbol of the very illusions she had wielded so masterfully. Elizabeth's tragedy was not only her own. It reflected a truth as ancient as time, that power is fragile, beauty is fleeting, and the masks we wear to defy mortality can become prisons that destroy us. She ruled an empire with brilliance and cunning, but in private, she lived and died as a woman at war with her own body. History remembered her majesty. Her attendants remembered her stench. The portraits show serenity, the records whisper of rot. And so Elizabeth I endures, both magnificent and monstrous. The queen who built her throne on illusion, and the woman whose body betrayed her with every passing year. She was a triumph and a tragedy, a figure of awe and horror alike. A reminder that even those crowned in glory cannot escape the decay of flesh, nor silence the truth that lingers beneath the mask. Her story closes not in triumph, but in contradiction. Elizabeth I left behind a kingdom stronger than she found it, a culture that bloomed in her shadow, and a legend that still burns bright in the memory of the world. Yet beneath the Golden Age, beneath the paintings and poems, lay a woman consumed by her own masks. Her flesh carried the scars of smallpox, the poison of cosmetics, the rot of sugar, and the weight of wigs that turned her scalp into a battlefield. Her life was a performance, one that demanded she trade truth for illusion and health for immortality. Centuries later, we are left with two Elizabeths. The first is the radiant monarch, immortalized in portraits, celebrated by poets, feared by enemies, adored by her people. The second is the hidden queen, whose attendants whispered of stench, whose doctors recoiled from her wounds, whose very body decayed while she still lived. Between them lies the dark truth she fought so hard to bury, that the crown could not save her from mortality. That power cannot silence decay. That even the Virgin Queen was made of flesh, fragile and fleeting. This is the lesson Elizabeth's life leaves us, that history's brightest icons may carry its darkest secrets, and that behind every mask lies a face that fears the mirror. She was England's glory, but also England's most haunting ghost. And it is in that tension, between magnificence and rot, that her true story endures. If you've stayed with us through this journey into Elizabeth's hidden decay, you are part of Cursed Chronicles. Subscribe now to uncover more of the dark truths history tried to bury. Tap like if you believe legends must be questioned, and share in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing our cursed tales echo across the world.